Commander Eric Martinez stared out the small viewport of the USV horizon, watching the stars streak by as the ship traveled through the outer reaches of the Centauri system. He rubbed his tired eyes and sipped the bitter coffee that had gone cold hours ago. As the only human aboard the vessel, he had grown accustomed to the solitude that came with being the sole representative of Earth on diplomatic missions. "Commander, we are approaching the Centauri Alliance outpost," said Krell, the blue-skinned navigator whose 6 fingers danced across the control panel with practiced ease. "We should arrive within 20 minutes. Eric nodded. "Inform the crew to prepare for docking procedures. This is a routine diplomatic exchange, but I want everyone sharp." The mission was simple: deliver updated treaty documents and establish better trade relations with the Centauri Alliance, nothing they hadn't done dozens of times before. The Horizon carried a crew of 17 different species, a living example of galactic cooperation that had taken centuries to build. Eric moved to the command chair and reviewed the mission parameters, one last time. Something felt off today, a nagging sensation at the back of his mind that he couldn't quite place. 20 years in space had taught him to trust his instincts. "Krell, run another scan of the surrounding area, full spectrum." Navigator looked surprised but complied immediately. "Yes, Commander." Moments later, alarm bells rang throughout the ship. Red emergency lights flashed, bathing the bridge in a crimson glow. "Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace," Krell shouted. Energy signatures matched Dravek warships. Eric's blood ran cold. The Dravek Empire had been pushing against Alliance borders for years, but an ambush this deep in friendly space was unprecedented. "Battle stations, shields up," Eric ordered. "Send an emergency signal to Alliance headquarters." But it was too late. 3 massive Dravek warships surrounded the horizon, their weapons already charged and ready. The diplomatic vessel stood no chance against such firepower. "They're hailing us," said Zara, the communications officer whose skin rippled with waves of color reflecting her anxiety. "On screen," Eric said, straightening his uniform. The screen flickered to life, revealing the sharp-featured face of a Dravek. "Commander." Gray skin stretched tight over a prominent brow ridge. 4 yellow eyes blinked independently of each other. "Surrender your vessel immediately," the Dravek commander said without introduction. "Lower your shields and prepare to be boarded." Eric's mind raced through their options. The Horizon was a diplomatic ship with minimal weapons. They couldn't outrun or outfight 3 Dravek warships. "This is a peaceful diplomatic vessel on a sanctioned mission," Eric replied, keeping his voice steady. "Any aggressive action against us violates 17 different treaties." The Dravek commander's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of pointed teeth. "Your treaties mean nothing here. You have 30 seconds to comply, or we will open fire." Eric looked around the bridge at his crew. They were diplomats and scientists, not soldiers. He couldn't risk their lives in a hopeless battle. "Stand down," he ordered quietly. "Lower shields." Within minutes, the harsh sound of Dravek boarding parties echoed through the ship's corridors. Heavy boots stomped on metal floors as armed soldiers secured each section of the horizon. Eric remained on the bridge, standing tall as the doors slid open to reveal 6 heavily armed Dravek soldiers. "Crew of the Horizon, you are now prisoners of the Dravek Empire," announced a purple-skinned officer whose rank insignia marked him as a captain. "Cooperate and you will not be harmed." The crew was rounded up efficiently, hands bound with energy restraints that adapted to each species' biology. As they were led to the Dravek ship, Eric noticed something strange. While the other crew members were being directed toward one section of the ship, a pair of guards pulled him aside. "Where are you taking me?" Eric asked. "My crew." Silence. "Human," one guard snapped. "Special containment protocols for your kind." Eric was marched down a separate corridor, away from the rest of his captured crew. The hallway grew narrower, the lighting dimmer. Finally, they stopped at a reinforced door that slid open to reveal a small cell with bare metal walls. "Inside," ordered the guard, shoving Eric forward. The door slid shut behind him with a final-sounding hiss. The cell was barely large enough for him to take 3 steps in any direction. A narrow cot protruded from one wall and a small sink and toilet occupied one corner. A tiny viewport in the door was the only way to see outside. Hours passed. Eric paced the small space, trying to understand why he had been separated from the others. Through the small viewport, he caught glimpses of other prisoners being processed. All 17 species from his crew were visible at various times, being led to what appeared to be communal holding areas. Only he remained in isolation. When a guard finally came to deliver a tray of unidentifiable food, Eric pressed close to the door. "Why am I being kept alone?" he asked. "The others are together. Even the Archidians who need methane atmosphere and the Taurans who require high gravity. Why separate only me?" The purple-skinned guard, different from the ones who had brought him in, flicked its sensory stalks dismissively. "Protocol for humans. Direct orders from high command." "But why?" Eric persisted. "Humans aren't particularly strong or dangerous compared to many other species you've got in there." The guard hesitated, studying Eric with an odd expression that might have been caution or even fear. "Food delivery complete. Step back from the door." As days passed in solitude, Eric began to notice patterns in how the guards behaved around him. They never lingered near his cell. They avoided eye contact. When they had to interact with him, they kept physical distance despite the door between them. It was as if they were afraid of some contamination. One day, as Eric watched through his viewport, he saw a new group of prisoners being processed. Various species were grouped together based on biological needs. But a single human woman was immediately separated and led down the same corridor that had brought him to isolation. The guards treated her with the same careful handling they used with him. No unnecessary contact, minimal verbal interaction, and complete isolation from other prisoners. Eric pressed his face against the viewport and called out as she passed. "Hey, what's your name?" She turned, surprised to hear another human voice. "Lisa," she answered quickly before a guard pushed her forward. "Why are they isolating us?" Eric called after her. Before she disappeared down the corridor, she managed to shout back, "They're not afraid of what we can do. They're afraid of what we can say." The words echoed in Eric's mind long after she was gone. Whatever reason the Dravik had for isolating human prisoners, it wasn't about physical danger. There was something else. Something about humans that these aliens feared enough to warrant special containment protocols. And Eric was determined to find out what it was. Lisa Warren adjusted the gray maintenance uniform that marked her as part of the cleaning staff of the Dravik prison complex. For 3 years, she had lived this double life, scrubbing floors and fixing broken pipes, while secretly gathering intelligence for the Galactic Alliance. No one suspected that the quiet human worker was actually a highly trained security specialist. Her real mission was clear: document alien detention practices and locate missing human prisoners of war. The war between humans and the Dravik had been going on for 8 years now, and too many captured soldiers and civilians had simply vanished into the vast prison system. Lisa pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor of Section 12, nodding respectfully to the guards who barely acknowledged her presence. They had grown used to her over the years, just another part of the prison machinery. This invisibility was her greatest asset. "Section 12 needs sanitizing," she murmured into the small device hidden in her collar, disguised as a uniform fastener. The code phrase would alert her handlers that she was about to begin surveillance of the high-security area. As she cleaned, Lisa carefully observed the prison layout. Unlike standard detention blocks, Section 12 housed only solitary confinement cells. Each cell was reinforced with triple-thick doors and advanced security measures. Lisa had mapped most of the prison over her years of work, and she had discovered something strange. Every single inhabitant of Section 12 was human. In the yacht, main detention areas, prisoners of all species were housed together based on their biological needs. Rock-skinned Taurans shared space with similar silicon-based life forms. Methane breathers had their own atmospheric sections. Even natural predator and prey species were managed in shared spaces with appropriate safeguards. Only humans were kept, completely isolated not just from other species but from each other. Today, Lisa had reason to be excited. A new human prisoner had arrived yesterday, and she had been assigned to clean his cell block. This might be her chance to make contact with Commander Eric Martinez, whose capture had been reported 3 weeks ago. Lisa turned a corner and nearly bumped into Chief Security Officer Krav, a high-ranking Dravek whose dark purple skin and prominent rank markings made other guards snap to attention. "Maintenance worker," Krav said, eyes narrowing. "You are not scheduled for Section 12B today." Lisa lowered her eyes, affecting the submissive posture expected of service workers. "Apologies, officer. There was a pipe leak reported in cell 1207. I was sent to fix it before the regular cleaning cycle." Krav studied her for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Be quick. The human in 1205 must not see or hear you. Understand?" "Yes, officer," Lisa replied, keeping her eyes down to hide the spark of interest. Cell 1205. That must be where they were keeping Martinez. After Krav moved on, Lisa pushed her cart toward the cell block. Through careful observation, she had learned the guard rotation patterns. She would have approximately 7 minutes before the next patrol passed through this section. As she worked on the fictional pipe leak, Lisa kept watch on cell 1205 through the reflection in her polished tools. The cell had a small viewport in the door, and occasionally she could see movement inside, a human figure pacing the small space. When the corridor was briefly empty, Lisa tapped a complex pattern on the water pipe that ran along the wall connecting several cells, an old Earth military code that any trained officer would recognize. After a moment, there was an answering tap from cell 1205. Contact established. Lisa quickly tapped out a message. "Alliance aware. Gathering data. Patience." The reply came back. "Why isolated? Others together." Lisa had been asking herself the same question for 3 years. Through careful observation and covert access to classified files, she had discovered references to an incident called the Proxima Uprising. The records were heavily redacted, but one phrase appeared repeatedly: cognitive contamination risk. She tapped back. Security, fear, human contact with aliens. Before she could communicate further, the sound of approaching footsteps forced her to return to her work. A guard patrol passed, and Lisa pretended to finish repairing the pipe. Later that day, Lisa used her maintenance access to enter a restricted terminal room during the night cycle. The room housed backup data systems for the prison's security logs. Years of working as maintenance staff had given her the access codes to these systems. The Dravek never suspected that a simple cleaner would understand their complex data architecture. Lisa plugged a small device into the terminal, breaking through 3 layers of security to access classified prison files. She had only minutes before the system would detect the unauthorized access. She searched quickly for any information about human isolation protocols. A file marked Incident Report, Proxima Detention Facility, caught her attention. The file was heavily encrypted, but her device was designed to copy data for later decryption. As the file copied, Lisa scanned what little information was visible. The report detailed an incident 8 years ago, at the beginning of the war. A human prisoner, named Daniel Wright, had somehow been placed in a communal cell with various alien species due to a processing error. The report used technical language, but Lisa could piece together what had happened. Within days of Wright's placement with the aliens, the previously compliant prisoners had begun questioning their treatment. They demanded better food, more exercise, time, and access to communication with their homeworlds. When these demands were ignored, the entire detention block erupted in a coordinated rebellion that destroyed significant portions of the facility. The report concluded, human subject displayed no physical aggression but engaged in extended verbal communication with non-human detainees. Post-incident interviews reveal concept transfer of rights, freedom, and resistance to authority. Recommend immediate isolation of all human prisoners to prevent further cognitive contamination. The security alert began to sound. Lisa quickly removed her device and erased evidence of her presence. She slipped out of the terminal room and back into the maintenance corridors, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. The next day, Lisa found a reason to work near Eric's cell again. When the corridor was clear, she tapped out a message. They fear our ideas, not our strength. The reply came quickly. Explain. Human concepts of freedom spread to aliens, caused uprising. They call it contamination. There was a long pause before Eric's reply came. So we're isolated because we talk about freedom? Yes, Lisa tapped. Your words are weapons here. Remember that. As she finished her maintenance work, Lisa noticed a Dravek guard watching her with unusual interest. Had she been too obvious in her communication attempts? The guard approached, sensory stalks twitching nervously. You work many sections, the guard said quietly. You have spoken to the human in 1205? Lisa froze, careful to keep her expression neutral. No, officer, I follow protocols. No communication with prisoners. The guard looked around to ensure they were alone. I heard him speaking through the door about Earth, about how people choose their leaders there. The guard's voice dropped even lower. Is it true that humans select who gives them orders? Lisa realized with sudden clarity that it was already happening again. Even with the strict isolation protocols, human ideas were leaking out. This guard had been listening to Eric's words, perhaps when Eric thought no one could hear him. I must report to my supervisor, Lisa said carefully, avoiding the question. As she pushed her cart away, she heard the guard whisper, Tell him others are listening. Tell him we want to hear more. Lisa smiled to herself. The Dravek's greatest fear was being realized despite all their precautions. Human ideas couldn't be contained by cell walls. The real reason for human isolation wasn't just a security protocol. It was fear of an ideology that could undermine the entire Dravek empire from within. She needed to get this information back to Alliance intelligence immediately. The war might not be won with weapons, but with words. Admiral Paul Garcia stood at the large window in his office, looking out at the stars. His gray hair and the deep lines on his face showed his age and experience. The Earth Fleet headquarters orbited high above the blue planet, a symbol of humanity's reach into space. Admiral, the encrypted transmission from Agent Warren has arrived, said his assistant, a young officer named Ben Carter. It's marked highest priority. Paul turned from the window and nodded. Send it to my secure terminal, and make sure we're not disturbed. As Ben left the room, Paul sat at his desk and entered his security codes. The screen lit up with Lisa Warren's report from deep within Dravek territory. He had sent her on this dangerous mission 3 years ago, and each report she managed to send was precious intelligence. Paul read through the information carefully, his expression growing more serious with each paragraph. Lisa had discovered something significant, the real reason behind the strange treatment of human prisoners across all alien detention systems. Computer, pull up all records related to the Proxima uprising, Paul ordered. Authorization Garcia Alpha 7. The computer responded instantly. Classified records retrieved. Display on main screen? Proceed. The wall screen filled with images and text from an incident 8 years earlier. Paul stood and walked closer, examining the details of what had happened at the Proxima detention facility. The records showed that a human explorer named Daniel Wright had been captured by Dravek forces during the early days of the conflict. Due to a processing error, Wright had been placed in a communal cell with 7 different alien species instead of isolation. Surveillance footage showed Wright talking with his alien cellmates. Nothing seemed unusual at first, just conversations to pass the time. But within days, the behavior of the alien prisoners began to change. They started questioning the guards. They demanded better treatment. They organized themselves. The footage showed a Zentari prisoner, a normally passive species, standing up to a guard and saying, "We have the right to communicate with our families." A Bolian prisoner could be heard asking, "Why should we accept orders without question?" Paul watched, fascinated, as Wright explained concepts like voting, representation, and the right to protest unfair treatment. The aliens listened intently, asking questions about how humans govern themselves. One clip showed Wright saying, "Where I come from, leaders are chosen by the people they lead. If they do a bad job, we replace them." A Dravik security officer's report was attached to the file. The human prisoner has infected the others with dangerous ideological constructs. These aliens now refuse to accept their proper place in the order of things. They question authority. They demand so-called rights. This contamination spread rapidly to all subjects with verbal contact. 3 days after Wright's placement in the communal cell, a full-scale riot broke out. The surveillance footage showed prisoners of various species working together in coordinated resistance. They overwhelmed guards, disabled security systems, and nearly escaped before reinforcements arrived. The report's conclusion was chilling. Human ideological constructs appear highly contagious to non-human sentience, creating irreversible changes in thought patterns and social compliance. Subject species show particular vulnerability to concepts of self-determination and authority questioning. Recommend immediate isolation protocols for all human detainees. As the recording ended, Paul leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply about what he had seen. "They're not afraid of our weapons," he said quietly to the empty room. "They're afraid of our ideas." Paul pressed a button on his desk. "Ben, assemble the intelligence team in the secure conference room, immediately." 30 minutes later, Paul stood before a group of the Earth Fleet's top intelligence officers. The room was secure, with no recording devices allowed. "What I'm about to share is classified at the highest level," Paul began. "Agent Warren has uncovered the real reason why humans are always isolated in alien prison systems." He showed them the footage and reports from the Proxima incident, watching their reactions change from curiosity to amazement. "Let me be clear about what we're seeing," Paul continued. "The Dravik Empire, like many hierarchical alien societies, depends on unquestioning obedience. Their citizens and soldiers are conditioned from birth to accept their place in society. They have no concept of democracy, individual rights, or questioning authority." He gestured to the screen showing Daniel Wright talking to his alien cellmates. "When this human shared basic ideas that we take for granted, voting, rights, freedom of choice, these concepts spread through the alien prisoners like a virus. They had never been exposed to such ideas before. It changed them fundamentally." "Commander." Susan Lewis raised her hand. "So the isolation protocol isn't about controlling humans. It's about preventing our ideas from spreading to their populations?" "Exactly," Paul confirmed. "According to the intelligence we've gathered, every advanced species in the galaxy now follows the same protocol with human prisoners. We're kept away from other species because our ideas are considered dangerous." Captain Frank Miller spoke up. "This explains why diplomatic progress has been so difficult. If they see our basic political philosophy as a form of contamination, no wonder they limit contact." Paul nodded. "But it also gives us an advantage we never knew we had. Agent Warren reports that even with isolation protocols in place, human ideas are beginning to leak into the Dravik prison system. Guards are listening. Some are asking questions." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. "Ladies and gentlemen," Paul said, "this changes our approach to the conflict. We've been fighting a conventional war, but our most powerful weapon may be something we've taken for granted: our belief in freedom and self-determination." He turned to Dr. Rita Brown, the chief xenopsychologist. "Doctor, is it possible to use this knowledge strategically? Could we intentionally deploy these contagious ideas?" Rita thought for a moment. "It's fascinating from a psychological perspective. These alien species have social structures built on rigid hierarchy. Concepts like personal choice and questioning authority are completely foreign to them, revolutionary even. And yes, with the right approach, we could potentially use this to our advantage." Paul looked around the room. "I want a proposal on my desk within 48 hours, a new strategy based on what we've learned. If human ideas are our most powerful weapon, let's figure out how to deploy them effectively." As the meeting ended, Paul returned to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Eric Martinez and countless other humans sat in isolation cells, kept separate from alien prisoners. "They can isolate our bodies," Paul said quietly, "but they can't isolate our ideas forever." Back in the Dravik prison, Eric, sat in his cell, thinking about the message Lisa had tapped through the pipes. Your words are weapons here. He had been speaking loudly in his cell for days now, talking about Earth history, explaining democracy, describing revolutions, and telling stories of ordinary people standing up to tyrants. He made sure his voice carried, knowing the guards could hear him even if they pretended not to listen. Eric wasn't sure if it was making any difference. The guards still avoided eye contact. They still kept their distance. But sometimes, he caught them lingering near his cell a little longer than necessary. Sometimes he saw them listening, and he kept talking, because now he understood. In this prison, his voice might be the most powerful weapon of all. Dr. Karen Mitchell stood before the Galactic Alliance Security Council, her presentation ready. The large room was filled with military officers and government officials who had gathered to hear her proposal. At 52, Karen was one of Earth's leading xenopsychologists, specializing in alien thought patterns and social structures. The evidence is clear, Karen said, pointing to the data on the large screen behind her. Across 17 different alien detention systems, humans are always kept in isolation. We now understand this isn't about controlling humans. It's about preventing our ideas from spreading. Admiral Garcia nodded from his seat in the front row. He had given Karen access to all the intelligence they had gathered, including Lisa Warren's reports from inside the Dravek prison system. What I'm proposing today is a strategic experiment, Karen continued. We use this knowledge to our advantage in the current conflict. The room grew quiet as officers leaned forward in their seats. This was something new, a psychological approach, to a war that had been fought with conventional weapons for 8 years. I propose we send 3 volunteer prisoners into different alien detention systems, Karen explained. Their mission will be simple. Strategic cognitive influence. In other words, they will deliberately share human concepts with their captors. General William Peters raised his hand. You want us to allow our people to be captured? That seems risky at best, suicidal at worst. Karen nodded. It would require volunteers who understand the risks. They would appear to be captured during routine operations. Once inside the prison systems, they would begin the real mission, talking about democracy, freedom, rights, and questioning authority. And, you believe this could work? Asked a skeptical voice from the back of the room. The Dravek and their allies already believe our ideas are dangerous, Karen replied. Their isolation protocols prove it, but we've seen from Agent Warren's reports that even with strict isolation, human concepts are beginning to spread. Guards are listening. Some are asking questions. Admiral Garcia stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, we've spent 8 years fighting this war with ships and weapons. We've lost good people and made little progress. If there's even a small chance this approach could work, I believe it's worth trying. After 3 hours of debate, the council voted to approve Dr. Mitchell's experiment. 3 volunteers would be prepared for this unusual mission, not to escape from alien prisons but to spread ideas within them. Meanwhile, in the Dravek prison, Eric Martinez had received a surprising message. During his daily meal delivery, he found a small note hidden under his food tray. The handwriting was clearly human. Speak to anyone who will listen. Tell stories of Earth. Explain democracy, freedom, human rights. You are more powerful than you know. Eric read the note several times before destroying it as instructed. The message confused him. It seemed to confirm what he had been doing already, talking about Earth in his cell. But who had sent it? Was it from Lisa, the undercover agent he had communicated with through the pipes? Or had the Alliance somehow managed to get a message to him? Either way, Eric decided to increase his efforts. That evening, as guards passed his cell, he began speaking, loudly, as if talking to himself but clearly meant to be overheard. On Earth we have this amazing system called democracy, he said. Every few years all adults get to vote for who will lead them. If the leaders do a bad job, we replace them with new ones. No one rules forever. No one is born into power. At first the guards ignored him, continuing their patrol without slowing. But Eric kept talking day after day, explaining different aspects of human society. In our legal system, everyone has rights, even criminals, Even prisoners, he explained. Another day. Everyone gets a fair trial. No one can be punished without evidence. And cruel punishment is not allowed, even for the worst criminals. After a week of this, Eric noticed a change. One particular guard, a younger Dravek with lighter purple skin, began to linger near his cell during these talks. The guard never spoke, but he would slow his patrol, standing just out of sight but clearly listening. 3 days later, during the night cycle when the prison was quiet, Eric heard a soft tap on his door. When he looked through the small viewport, he saw the young guard standing there, nervously looking up and down the corridor. "Is it true?" the guard whispered. "That humans choose their own leaders?" Eric felt a surge of excitement but kept his voice calm. "Yes, it's true. We call it voting." The guard's sensory stalks twitched with interest. "And anyone can be chosen? Not just those born to rule?" "Anyone who the people believe will do a good job," Eric confirmed. "Some of our greatest leaders came from poor backgrounds. They weren't special by birth, they became special by their actions and ideas." The guard fell silent, thinking about this. Finally he asked, "And if a leader is bad? If they hurt people or make bad decisions?" "We vote them out at the next election," Eric explained. "Or in extreme cases, they can be removed from office early. No one has the right to rule forever. Power belongs to the people, who lend it to their leaders temporarily." The guard's eyes widened at this concept. In Dravek society, power flowed from the top down. The high command ruled absolutely, and questioning their decisions was punishable by death. "I must go," the guard said suddenly, hearing footsteps approaching from down the corridor. "But I would like to hear more about this voting." Over the next few weeks, these secret conversations continued. The young guard, who eventually revealed his name was Traz, began bringing questions from others. "Some of the other guards are curious," Traz admitted during one late-night conversation. "They've never heard such ideas before." Eric was careful, not to push too hard. He simply answered questions and explained how human societies functioned. He talked about freedom of speech, the right to peaceful protest, and the concept that government should serve the people rather than control them. What Eric didn't know was that similar conversations were happening throughout the Dravek Empire. The 3 volunteer prisoners placed by Dr. Mitchell's program had been captured and placed in separate detention facilities. Each was carefully sharing human concepts with their captors, planting seeds of doubt in the rigid Dravek hierarchy. In the command center of Earth Fleet headquarters, Admiral Garcia and Dr. Mitchell monitored what little information they could gather about the experiment. "It's spreading faster than we anticipated," Karen said, showing Paul the reports from their intelligence network. "We're getting rumors of guards asking questions, of small groups meeting in secret to discuss human ideas." Paul studied the data. "The Dravek High Command must be getting nervous. Their entire system depends on absolute obedience." "Exactly," Karen agreed. "And that's what makes human ideas so dangerous to them. Once people start questioning why they must obey without thought, the whole system becomes vulnerable." 3 weeks after his first conversation with Traz, Eric was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of his cell door opening. He sat up quickly, expecting trouble. Traz stood in the doorway, sensory stalks twitching nervously. Behind him were 3 other guards, all looking anxious but determined. "The others want to hear more," Traz said simply. "About this voting system, about choosing leaders." Eric looked at the small group of Dravek guards, seeing the hunger for knowledge in their eyes. He realized that something remarkable was happening, not just in this prison, but perhaps throughout the Dravek Empire. 2. Revolution had begun, not with weapons, but with words. The Dravek High Command emergency meeting chamber had never been so tense. 7 purple-skinned senior officers sat around the large black table, their sensory stalks twitching nervously as they reviewed the reports from across their territory. "This is unprecedented," said Supreme Commander Vex, the oldest of the group. "We have reports of questioning behavior from personnel at 17 different detention facilities." Another officer, General Kraz, tapped his claw on the table. "Not just questions. There are small gatherings happening in the lower ranks. They are discussing human concepts, dangerous ideas like selecting leaders through voting. How did this happen? Vex demanded. We have strict isolation protocols for human prisoners. They should not have been able to spread their cognitive contamination. The security chief, a grim-faced Dravek named Drool, brought up a series of images on the large screen. It seems the isolation is not enough. The humans speak loudly in their cells. Guards overhear them. One human speaks to one guard who speaks to another, and the ideas spread. This is why we always separate them, Vex said angrily. Human ideas are like a virus. They infect the mind and change how people think. We have increased security at all facilities, Drool reported. But the damage is already spreading. We've arrested 28 guards for unauthorized discussions of human political concepts. Each one had spoken to at least 3 others before being caught. The officers fell silent, contemplating the threat. Their empire had stood for thousands of years, built on rigid hierarchy and unquestioning obedience. Now it faced a threat unlike any before, not from weapons, but from ideas. New emergency protocols, Vex finally ordered. Any guard who has contact with a human prisoner is to be reassigned immediately. Rotate personnel daily. No one speaks to the humans, not even to give orders. Use automatic systems for all prisoner needs. But even as the High Command implemented these new measures, they did not realize it was already too late. In the prison where Eric Martinez was held, change was happening faster than anyone expected. What had begun as secret conversations with one curious guard had grown into something more. Traz had brought other guards to listen to Eric's explanations of democracy, rights, and freedom. Those guards had told others. Guards had begun speaking, with other alien prisoners sharing the new ideas they had learned. Then one night, Eric's cell door opened unexpectedly. Traz stood there with 10 other guards, all looking determined. We have decided, Traz said simply. We want what humans have the right to choose, the right to speak freely, the right to question those in power. Eric stood slowly, hardly believing what was happening. This is dangerous, he warned them. The High Command won't give up control easily. We know, Traz replied. But once we understood that another way is possible, we could not go back to blind obedience. What happened next occurred so quickly that Eric could hardly follow it. The guards had planned carefully. They disabled the security systems, released Eric and other prisoners who had shown interest in human concepts, and took control of the prison's communications center. From there, they sent messages to other detention facilities where similar discussions had been happening. Within hours, reports came back of guards in other prisons taking similar actions. It's not just here, Traz told Eric excitedly. It's happening across the Empire. Guards, workers, even some military units, all questioning, all wanting change. Similar scenes were playing out elsewhere. At the detention facility where Lisa Warren had been gathering intelligence, she found herself suddenly free, with former guards asking for her help in organizing a fair system for making decisions. On a prison ship near the Centauri border, one of Dr. Mitchell's volunteer prisoners watched in amazement as the crew turned against their commanders, demanding the right to vote on their next destination. Back on Earth, Admiral Garcia stood in the Fleet Headquarters Command Center, watching the reports come in from across Dravik space. What had begun as a small experiment had ignited a firestorm of change. We never expected it to spread this fast, Dr. Mitchell said, standing beside him. The desire for freedom and self-determination must have been there all along, just waiting for someone to show them it was possible. Paul nodded. Their entire society was built on preventing people from asking why. Once they started asking that question, the system couldn't hold. New reports continued to arrive. Military units refusing orders, workers in Dravik factories demanding rights, communication channels filled with discussions of elections and representation. The revolution wasn't happening with weapons. It was happening with words and ideas. 6 weeks after the first prison uprising, Admiral Garcia welcomed a very special group to Earth. Eric Martinez, Lisa Warren, and the other humans who had been held in Dravik prisons arrived on a transport ship, accompanied by Traz and other former guards who now called themselves the Freedom Council. The Earth Fleet Headquarters conference room was packed as Eric and Traz told their story to the Galactic Alliance Security Council. "We never fired a shot," Eric explained. "All I did was talk. All I did was explain how humans govern ourselves, how we choose our leaders, how we believe in rights that belong to everyone." Traz stepped forward, his purple skin gleaming under the lights. "These ideas, voting, rights, questioning authority, they were completely new to us. In our society, from birth we are taught to obey without question. The leaders rule because they have always ruled. No one asks why. But once we heard about another way," Traz continued, "we could not go back. It was like seeing color after a lifetime of gray. Once you know freedom is possible, you cannot accept chains anymore." Admiral Garcia stood to address the council. "Ladies and gentlemen, we finally understand why every advanced species in the galaxy isolates human prisoners. It's not because we're dangerous physically, it's because we're dangerous ideologically." Lisa Warren, now returned from her undercover mission, added, "Concepts we take for granted, personal freedom, self-governance, the right to question authority, these ideas are revolutionary in hierarchical alien societies. When exposed to human thinking, many species experience what their leaders call cognitive contamination, but what we would call enlightenment." Eric stood and delivered the final assessment. "We've always wondered why humans are treated differently, as prisoners of war. Now we know. It's not our bodies they fear, it's our minds. The most dangerous human weapon isn't our technology, it's our ideas." The council voted unanimously to officially classify this phenomenon. They called it cognitive liberation theory, but among military personnel it quickly gained a simpler name: the freedom virus. 1 year later, the war with the Drevek was over. The old high command had fallen, replaced by an elected council where Traz served as a representative. Trade agreements were signed. Peace treaties were established. In the new Galactic Alliance, headquarters on neutral ground, humans and former enemies worked side by side. And on the wall of the main chamber, a simple plaque bore witness to the most powerful force in the universe. Not weapons or technology, but ideas. No walls can contain them. No prison can hold them. Ideas, once spoken, can change worlds. Human prisoners would continue to be isolated throughout the galaxy, but now, humanity knew exactly why, and occasionally, very quietly, they would ensure that a few carefully chosen individuals would not remain quite isolated enough.